guys, welcome back to Goatman. My name's Joe Barlow and today I've got another project Deconstruction for you. If you've been watching the series so far, then you know I've been attempting to recreate a visual effect from every single Marvel film. This week I've watched Iron Man 3 and I recreated a HUD. This was originally uploaded on Instagram, so if you want to see these before I do the project Deconstructions, then do be sure you follow me over there, link in the description. If you haven't seen the effect already though, don't worry, here it is.
Retinal scan complete. All systems online. Suit capacity at 22%. Alert. Sir, we have an incoming missile. I recommend evasive maneuvers. Recalibrating flight path.
Right, so here is the reference shot for today's video. It is of course the HUD from Iron Man 3. Now, although we are doing the HUD from Iron Man 3, we're not specifically referencing any one HUD. We see it a couple of times. We see Pepper wearing one, we see Tony, and we also see War Machine, of course, as well as the Iron Legion. So we see loads of different HUDs, and it's definitely what inspired me to make today's shot. But as mentioned, I'll be making my own and just taking reference from various elements. So here we are in After Effects. Now, there are two shots in this sequence, this POV shot and of course the helmet interior. And on both, there are just a bunch of elements happening. So I think the best way to show you this is just to go through them sort of chronologically and break down each individual element because there are so many. Now, the first thing I obviously needed was footage of my face and a 3D track to make everything sort of react to the movement. And the way I did this was go into my footage, and if I just remove this mask for now, you'll see we've just got me on a blank wall, moving my head around, reacting to fake elements that aren't really there, but you know, that's what was meant to be popping up. Little bits of targeting, a little bit of sort of tracking. I don't think at this point I decided that I was going to be flying through anywhere. I just wanted to have this shot so I could isolate my face, which I've done here using a mask, and then I used the track mask feature, and I got a nice outline track to give me this. Which is pretty similar to what we have in the Iron Man films in the wider MCU. Whenever we see anyone inside of the Iron Man armor, we just have this solo face in this very dark background. So what I did next was pre-comp that, and I ran it through a camera tracker. Now, what the camera tracker usually does is takes reference from different bits in your scene, and it tries to simulate the camera movement. Now, if you remember the shot a moment ago, it was a static camera on a blank background, but because we don't have that anymore and all we have is the face movement, it assumes that the camera is moving around my face rather than my face moving. And this is a great way to get a fake 3D movement, which is what I linked all of the elements from today's video to. So of course I went ahead and created a camera, and then one by one I populated the area in front of my face. So let's take a look at some of those elements. So you see in just the first second of this video, a lot of different things are happening already, but most importantly is this sort of retinal scan thing going on. The idea behind this was not everything will already be on screen. I wanted to sort of load up. I took reference from a shot from Iron Man 1. Actually, when we first see the HUD, we get this sort of fall back into the suit, which I thought looked kind of cool, so I went ahead and copied that. And of course I did this retinal scan to sort of, you know, allow access to the systems before we see everything else load, and it gave me opportunity to sort of do a load of different loading things as well. So let's take a look at the eye. Now you see this is built up of a bunch of different things. So we've got a load of shapes sort of scaling in and fading in and all sorts. And this is a lot of the different things. There's a lot of movement to everything, and everything sort of appears out of nowhere almost. So scaling and fading was always a great way of sort of making these things appear on screen. As well as scaling up from nothing, scaling down from somewhere already quite large, but fade in was a brilliant way to just add a bit of variety so everything wasn't scaling up. So I probably won't mention that too often because I use it a lot throughout, and I'll probably just go over some of the other things going on. So let's just quickly take a watch of this again. You'll see that scaling happening. And then we've also got some text on screen. You know, it's just sort of to prompt what's actually happening. The eye is being scanned, scan complete. And then we have this line coming down, which obviously is the scanning in process, as well as these plexus lines. If anyone's used plexus before, it's a great way of creating this sort of network, this spider web of detail. It's quite a heavy plugin though. I didn't want to bulk down my composition with a tiny little element like this in the very first bit of my video, so I just actually used some pre-rendered footage that I've got of this, and that just sits around the pupil that I've got there. And the pupil's actually something I bought in from Illustrator, because everything here I made in Illustrator and then imported it into After Effects. I thought it would be a quick way of making and designing all of the different elements rather than building it all here in After Effects. It's obviously built to do that a little bit better. The only other things we've actually got going on is this text to transition between the text, the scan, and the scan complete. I just used a little cross blur. I thought it kind of did this cool sort of almost glitch sort of change, so it didn't just switch. And then we got these numbers just scrolling through different numbers. The idea behind this was that something is being tracked or loaded. Just a little bit of movement to this, and that's just a wiggle on a character offset, so we got this cool sort of movement, and that's the entirety of that element. And that's element number one in this mess of a composition. So let's go ahead and look at the helm. So this is just a 3D element that I dropped in with the camera from before, and you can really see that camera being forward into thinking it's moving around my face rather than my face being the thing that's moved. It's probably the best representation we've got of that, so you can see what's actually happening. With the 3D object itself, this is something I found online. It was originally meant to 3D print a Iron Man helmet, so it was all broken up into pieces, and I've just grabbed this sort of exterior frame from it, converted it to an OBJ and imported it into Element, and once in Element I've given it this nice wireframe texture, which is one of the preset textures here. So that is all I needed to do for this element. And if we take a look back at the composition, once it's framed on there, you see it just sort of matches my head movement. It works mostly. There's the occasion when I feel like it should be behind my face, maybe here, but it wasn't something I was worried about too much. When it does come on, I added a block dissolve if I just solo that quickly, and I felt like that was a good way of loading that in. It looked like different parts were loading up at different times. Let's bring in my face movement again. There you go. So I like that. I think it was one of the cooler looking elements from everything. Now I'm just going to quickly skip over the compass because it comes in slightly later on and focus more on some of the outer bits that were appearing. These are things like the grid, the lines, the measures. These start from the beginning and they just sort of scale in with me. I've made these all natively in After Effects, I believe. Let's just take a look. So the grid is just a grid effect on a solid, nothing special there. And of course I've added a Gaussian blur and a fill to give it its color and a little bit of blur. And then I've used this optics compensation. Now if I just take this off, you'll see it's actually a pretty flat grid, but by adding this on, it bends. Now this is something I saw within a lot of the HUD elements. It curves around Tony Stark's face. And it's something I wanted to make sure I covered in this. And just by having these bits on the edge, the elements that happen in front of my face generally are flat and maybe angled slightly using a 3D camera, but these bend and it does really help sell that sort of HUD in the helmet look. So I've done the same thing with the lines here. I've actually added a glow, Gaussian blur, and that optics compensation again, as well as this measure. So the lines here are again just built natively in After Effects. Nothing actually happens with these. They're purely visual. I've built them though using the stroke and dash lines and all that good stuff. So you'll see here I've added dashes and gaps and offset just to give that sort of measurement feel to it. Over on this, there's a little bit more happening. We've got this thing moving up and down and a few different bits moving in the center, but this was mostly down to wiggle expressions on the position. I've used this expression here, which means only the Y value moves. So it's going to just scroll up and down rather than side to side as well. and I've used that on various different bits throughout. But these are mostly just squares, rectangles, all built to this cool looking thing. And then I've added this little thing which I built in Illustrator, and this is just like a little target thing which is meant to just sort of say, hey, let's focus on this point. Nothing particularly happened in this other than that scrolling up and down, but those little bits of movement really help once we put them onto our full composition. And you can see it doesn't actually quite load until later on, but it just happens throughout. It just moves up and down and helps. So the next two things I want to focus on is this center and outer element. Now these, again, nothing particularly is happening. It's not meant to represent anything, but it is just a bunch of movement. Here again, you'll see I made everything in Illustrator, and then I've just added some random wiggles, expressions to the rotation, and it gives me this cool looking thing. It makes it look like something's actually happening. If I take a look at the outer as well, same sort of thing happening here. I've generated some of these dotted lines just to build it up a little bit more in After Effects, but generally just things spinning and rotating. And when we add those onto the composition, I've added a little bit of Gaussian blur, a little bit of fill to give it the color again, and they're just happening in the background, and it makes it look like there's some sort of processing power happening without actually illustrating a feature, which load on a little bit later in the video, which is what we'll move on to next, I think. And there you are, there's that shot so far, just populating all of those different elements already, but there is plenty more that happens. So the next thing I've turned on is this flight path. You'll see it's turned down to 40% on the opacity there, and the Gaussian blur is whacked up to 20, so it's pretty much out of sight anyway, but it is just something that overlays my face. It's meant to be what I'm actually seeing. So let's just take a look inside of it and see what this is actually built up of. So the first thing we got is this footage. Now, a little fun fact, this is me on my electric skateboard. I held my camera on my phone out and just went down this sort of wooded path. And this was just going to be what I fly through a little later on. Not something I decided that I was doing until I'd already started making this video. I thought it'd be cool if I had a point of view shot as well. So I did go ahead and film this a little later on. And once I'd done that, I went ahead and created a couple of elements to overlay it with. Now this is meant to represent a sort of flight path or a flight gauge, so I went ahead and looked up some different elements that an aeroplane has, some actual measurement tools, and I decided this was a cool looking one. I then went ahead and overlaid these dots. These are actually reused from a different composition that I made at an earlier point, but I decided I could reuse them here. And then I also went ahead and added these little corner elements and animated them all on like so. Again, scaling, fading, doing whatever I can to just add a little bit of movement to those elements. So this all happens pretty much in front of my face, but quite invisible. It is there and it happens throughout, like I mentioned, but not necessarily the big focus of this shot. So once everything has loaded in and my retinal scan is complete, and I've passed that, things start loading up. Now these are sort of instruments this time. We've got compasses, we've got flight gauges, all these different systems that I'm obviously tracking while I'm flying. So let's take a look at some of these. We'll start right back at the bottom of the composition and we'll take a look at this compass. So within the composition here, we've got glows and Gaussian blurs just to take it out of focus a little bit, give it a bit more glow, because these are sort of holographic images. But if we take a look inside its own composition, you'll see quite a bit happening here. We've got it scaling on and fading in like many of the other elements we've seen already, but we've also got these wiggles just to sort of add some rotation, because we want to simulate the movement of an actual compass. And if you've ever used one, then you'll know it sort of bobs to the left, to the right, and it tries to sort of right itself and always point true north. Now this is a design I saw online. I actually found a HUD pack that looked great, and I went ahead and took reference from their design because I thought it looked so cool. So this is what we were left with on this. I went ahead and obviously made all of that in Illustrator as well, added the animation in separately, and that went on to the composition here. Now we will see it load up over on this side, and this is one of the first things we see load up once that retinal scan is complete. There's something that loads on about the same time as that compass is this Iron Man suit. There's a lot happening here, and because of this I actually did a lot of work within its own composition. and then there's compositions within the composition, and things get a little bit messy here, but we'll try and guide our way through this. So the first thing you'll notice is we've got that camera here in this composition as well, and that's because we've got yet another 3D object. We've actually got 4, but they're all the same. They're all this suit of armor here, and the reason there's 4 is just because certain colors load in at different times in different ways, and I wanted to make it look, again, like the other bits. It's holographic. I wanted to make it look like bits are loading in at different times. This again was a 3D model that you could print, but again I've converted it to an OBJ in order to be able to bring it into After Effects here, and I've added on different textures. I've used this glass effect. It's a slightly modified version of the wireframe. I got rid of some of the lines. I didn't like it on all of them. On some I think it actually remains, in others you'll see it's red, blue, just basically whatever I felt looked right. So let's just quickly scroll through these just to see. Nope, they are all blue, but there you go, one's got the wireframe there, and that gives it a little bit more detail. And if we just zoom in slightly, you'll see different bits load in at different times. Now we've got block dissolves on there as well, different hues and saturations. We've also got some color vibrance, and this was just to add a bit of variety to those different layers. And we've got this find edges, and I think this one actually loads first, so we get sort of an outline of it, and then a blue version of it comes in with a block dissolve there sort of glitching in, and then finally the red one comes back and makes it more solid again, and that's pretty much what we end up with throughout the entire shot. So a couple of different things happening there just to bring this suit of armor in at the very beginning. Now also around this I wanted to create like this base thing for it to sit on. This is just a bunch of things rotating. In fact, only the one thing rotating there. It's just mostly circles, and it's just something cool for it to stand on. Likewise with this top one, that's just to make it a little bit brighter. And this entire element is something that was directly referenced from Iron Man 3. There was something very similar to this at one point. So I did go ahead and copy the design of this as well. Now if I just go into this measure, you'll see there's a lot of different things happening. So we've got this little target from before. This is actually where we stole that from. A bunch of rectangles moving up and down. And this gauge just sort of tracking, I don't know, power levels or something. So we start with this general shape, and again I copied this from Iron Man 3. This is just what it looked like. I've gone ahead and added a gradient ramp on the next layer with, again, that expression that animates just the Y properties. So that gradient ramp is popping up and down. I'm not sure what this ever was. I couldn't work it out. I think it's maybe just a bug in the code. But I left it in. Maybe there's some sort of power surge. I wasn't too worried about that being there. Then as we add this next layer on, you'll see that targeting system again. And the next few layers are just general shapes moving up and down until we get to this top one, which we'll get back to in a moment. Let's just take a look at those shapes. So that's just them going up and down this line with that same expression on. Now this next thing that comes in, this big thing here, you'll notice it comes in with that block dissolve in again. And this also has that expression on. Obviously I wanted everything to sort of float around and move the same, but this also has some numbers right at the bottom. We've seen this effect before at the beginning, and then that 22% sits on top, matching that block dissolve. But the next thing we've got is this beam. Now I've used the beam here in order to follow the 2 points. So one end is following, if I just pause everything a second, one end of the beam is following this, and the other one is staying static to this, and that gives me that cool sort of join up there. Then we've took it over into this composition, made it 3D, and matched the movement of everything here. And finally we've added a Gaussian and a glow here, and that sort of exists throughout until around the middle when it does shut down and it's replaced with a different system, which we'll get to in a little bit. So everything's starting to look like that final shot now, but there's a couple more things we still need to turn on. The next thing we're going to focus on is these rounds. Now we've got round 3, round 3.2, round 3.3, and these are 3 different compositions that are broken down, and you'll see they highlight around my eye. It's something that shows up in a lot of the different Iron Man suits. There's some sort of eye track. I always see it as like some sort of cursor. that Tony Stark uses in order to sort of pinpoint which thing he wants open. For this, I just made a few different circles and dropped them into that 3D space. So nothing special really happening here. We got a bit of rotation on that one. On the next one, so just quickly have a look. A little bit of scaling difference, and on that third, we've got a little bit of scaling as well, but not as aggressive. So they all sort of work together. You see them here all coming in, and I think I've done that animation straight on this composition here, so again, scales, positions, those sort of things. If we let that play through, you'll see they just sort of trace where my eye is, and just sort of generally happen. Once the scanning is complete, these load in nicely. So I'm going to just quickly skip over these two layers because they don't happen until a little bit later on. But we've also got this outer. Now for the outer, I've actually just taken the outer that we've seen before, scale it up, blur it much more, and that just looks like it's really, really close to the camera, really far in the distance. It just sort of rotates and has the same animation as this thing here, but it adds to that sort of depthiness that you see. A couple of the suits we see in Iron Man 3 has things happening really close to camera, others are really close to the face, but it was just something I put in to cover up a little bit of this and add some more depth. Scrolling up through the composition, there's a few smaller elements that I'll just quickly show you. I won't go into them too much. We've got this thing called wave up here. Now what this is this sort of line scan. In fact, it'll probably play through better. It's just sort of like line scan thing going through here. Again, scale in, but on the Y position. And I made this in Illustrator. And this is something I created for our flight tracker, which is our last element. We're going to look at this half of the composition before things really switch up. So here's our flight tracker. So we've got that wave up that I've just shown you, a bunch of numbers that we've seen before, these little elements that rotate slowly, and the footage that we're also using in the POV shot. This is also where we originally used the dots that we reused in the other shot from earlier on. And the only other element on this is this gauge in the middle. Again, just some rotating numbers and a little wiggle on that to give it a little bit of movement. And that exists just over here. It loads on at a similar time to the compass, like that. And then it exists throughout the shot. I am not going to try and play this through because at this point the composition is getting very bulky, and this is one of the main reasons I decided to do everything in small little compositions rather than everything on the actual main composition. So around halfway through this video, everything closes up and some new elements come in, and these are weapon wheels and trackers. I think there's a targeting system as well, and the idea behind this is a missile's chasing me and I've got to maybe sort of guide it to a safe area for it to blow up. So let's just take a look at some of those new elements that come up towards the end. We start with a alert. Here it is, just in its own composition, nothing more than the word alert and a little sort of cool design there, which by looks of it I made in After Effects, all in After Effects. I think this was an afterthought, hence why it was all made in After Effects. So once that alert has come up, you'll notice everything does shut down, and this outer ring has turned red as well, just to sort of reference the fact that this is like danger, imminent impact or whatever. But this does give us a nice empty helmet to repopulate with new systems. So let's just take a look at some of those. We start with another use of that outer animation from the beginning. This time it's red and this time it's on the other side. Just repurposing already created animations. The next thing that comes up is our weapon wheel. Now this was meant to be some sort of system that says, hey, this is chasing you, watch out, danger. If we just open up that composition, it'll probably play through a little bit better. So you'll see it opens up, scaling, rotation, all that sort of automation we've had throughout. But then we get this this main sort of triangle looking thing, and that scales up, spins around, and then it scales up a little bit more before we get this missile. This missile is actually another 3D object using the same sort of stuff we've been doing already with the wireframe. Here it is. Oh, I thought we were going to have a crash there. Yeah, this is just another 3D object with a wireframe. This time it was actually from Turbo Squid, so it actually was created to be a 3D object rather than something printed, and that pops in here and just sort of spins. Now that's all positioned to this one side, which means this side's a little bit empty, and considering my eye direction's over there, I thought I'd best fill this in. So I added some targeting systems. So this is meant to be part radar, part targeting system, some sort of tracker for the missile that's about to hit us. We've got that scaling animation at the beginning, we've got rotation throughout, and this little blip as well, which sort of tracks through our element here. And then finally, this thing that pops up at the end saying impact zone. Now I'm not sure if that impact zone is seen in the final composition. I think it might actually be cut out, but that's our targeting system to the one side. Slightly lower on the composition is our round 2. So this is our round 2, and this is meant to be another eye targeting system. This time specifically for sort of like a weapon interface rather than a sort of flight interface. And this switches place with those rounds that were on before, scales in on its own. And that's just a simple little thing that just goes on top of the eye again, which leads us to our last little bit of work, which is this section down here. So we've got something called tag and something called list. Now if I turn these on, you'll actually see they come up way earlier when everything was still blue. And if we just play through this, the idea behind this was my character is somehow controlling the AI to shut down all flight systems and put all power into sort of the weapon systems. So you'll see that tag pop up, and it's currently under compass, and then a couple of the options pop up, and I'm going to select weapons, and that will collapse back down. And this is sort of the same time the weapon wheel actually loads up. So we just watch that a little bit faster. I think that might be enough to sort of get the idea of what it is before going into it. So there you go. Things just switching up. So let's actually just watch that in its own composition, just so you can see it better. So this one is tag, and you'll see it just sort of pops up, scales up, rotates around. I thought this looked kind of cool, and mixed up with that other bit, which is list. I chose to do this in a separate composition. I don't know why, actually. But there we go. Weapons are selected, they scale back in and collapse back down, then put together, and a little bit of time in, everything turns red. That is then selected, and the weapons wheel comes up, which leaves us with our helmet interior. So that was everything inside of the helmet itself, but I also did a POV shot. Now this was just something to cut between. I'm not going to go into this anywhere near as much, but you'll see I've just overlaid some of those HUD elements in once again. And these didn't require a track or anything because they were just on top of the camera rather than inside a 3D environment. So you'll see I've reused the sort of grids. I've reused the little elements that we've seen before that scale up and down, as well as some unused stuff that I made and I pop back in. Now as we scan through here, we do come to a little area where there's some 3D objects. I've popped these arrows on, and this is meant to be some sort of flight path, and then sort of warnings on the trees like don't hit these, go through the middle of those. They are 3D tracked. Inside of marker, I believe, because I couldn't quite get a clean camera track. Like I said, I cut between this and the helmet shots, but I also created this shot. Now this was sort of the finale of the video, and similar things again. We've got the red now. This is actually when it's sort of turned up to that weapon system. Exactly the same as the other one, different elements floating around, but we do have a bit of 3D camera tracking here as well. And this is meant to be when I've decided where the impact zone is going to be. So we've got this little tag that pops up to start with, or a drop pin as I've called it. And that is just simply that, a little bit of an animation tracked into here. So then I've gone ahead and added the missile. It's the same missile as before, but this time I've added sort of a metallic texture to it instead of the sort of wireframe holographic thing. Everything here I tracked in sort of roughly. Like I said, I couldn't get the camera track to work quite well here, so I've just sort of winged it on that. And then I've added this nice explosion, as well as the flare sort of helping out there to sort of make it look like that was the impact zone that I chose, and I dodged it, and then the explosion happened. So once I finished these, I went ahead and rendered them out and edited them together in Premiere. You'll see that again in a moment. But you'll see this is sort of an afterthought really, and I'm using just a lot of elements I've already created, so I won't go into all of these again. But it gives you a basic idea of a POV shot.
Retinal scan complete. All systems online. Suit capacity at 22%. Alert. Sir, we have an incoming missile. I recommend evasive maneuvers. Recalibrating flight path.
And that was my attempt at recreating a HUD visual effect. As I mentioned at the start of the video, these are being uploaded to Instagram, so do be sure you follow me over there, and then subscribe here on YouTube to see the project Deconstructions. Until next week though, goodbye.